Hey everyone, it's Michael GoosebumpsFan. I hope you're doing well today. I have another Give Yourself Goosebumps book, a GYG book, here to talk about today. This is in the last 3 that I have to read. I have 2 more after this particular review. And I'm planning on taking a break, just reading a couple of different books from different series from Goosebumps before I come back, finish up the GYG series, and go from there with the ranking videos and stuff that I typically do for each series that I finish. Anyway, today's review is for Give Yourself Goosebumps number 34, Elevator to Nowhere. I have, over the years, I've acknowledged that this cover exists. I've acknowledged that this book exists. I've never read it. This is the first time I've ever read it today. And Elevator to Nowhere's cover, this cover right here, is the most obnoxiously dull, probably bad cover I've ever seen in Goosebumps. And I always forget about how bad this one looks to me. And I've always put it off, whether it be the really lackluster, like halfway through the color or cover style changed of GYG. This is one of the worst, whether we're talking about the GYG covers or just any series at all, in my opinion. This might be my least favorite, most hated cover to ever exist from Goosebumps, ever. That could change, but I hate it. I genuinely think the cover's awful. But anyway, of all the things that happen in this book, why in the world would you pick this to be the cover of the book? That to me is insulting because this book was really solid. I had a good time with this. I never would have thought in a million years that I would have had a good time with this read. And I swear there was other books that had to do with elevators already. I could have sworn I already read this one. Apparently I did not. I could have sworn I read this one already. Apparently my brain will get this book confused with Checkout Time at the Dead End Hotel, or the Dead Hotel, whatever it's called. And I don't know why. That covers a skeleton in like a bellhop suit. So I don't really understand what happened to me. Anyway, so I read this book today. Like I said, never read it before. Kept telling my wife last night how I wasn't looking forward to starting this today, or finishing this today, or reading it, or whatever today, because of how bad the cover looked, because of the idea of this Elevator to Nowhere title that just sounded so dull, so lackluster. It seemed like it would be such a dull, probably a time travel type of story. And to my surprise, like I said, I was very shocked by how good of a time I had with this read. Elevator to Nowhere is a little bit different than what I expected to be. It's kind of similar to what I thought in premise, but in execution, absolutely not. This book is very kind of dark, not in like a gothic sense, but just the kind of things that can happen to you as a kid reading this book are horrifying, truly horrifying. Now, where do I even start with this book? Basically, you and your best friend, Jamie Jenkins. Yes, I heard that name later on in the book. Jamie Jenkins is her last name. And I thought immediately of my favorite podcast. I've posted them on my community posts sometimes, called The Skeleton Crew. They used to be around for a long time back in the day. They've kind of stopped making videos together. Alex, the main host of that show, that podcast, really the only horror podcast I listen to, every once in a while he'll make something for his YouTube channel called The Skeleton Crew, or The Skeleton Crew Show. Favorite podcast of all time. Jamie Jenkins at one point was a hostess on that show, and I loved her. She was so great. But to have the name Jamie Jenkins dropped into a Goosebumps book was baffling to me. That was so cool. But anyway, you and Jamie Jenkins, your best friend, are going to have a science fair project, and her uncle is named Darius. He happens to be a kind of a, not really a mad scientist per se, but he does these wacky inventions that sometimes do what they're supposed to and sometimes really don't. It seems like a little bit of an iffy situation that you'd go to that guy for your science fair project ideas, when really you could just make like a potato that turns a light bulb on. You know, it seems like a little bit of a hassle to go to that guy. What does he even do for a living? If he's an inventor but he's not always successful, which I guess that's argumentative for every inventor out there, there can be inventions that don't work for a long time or never work. That's a little weird. Why would you go to him, of all people? Anyway, you guys go over to his house, and when you get in there, you're talking to him, and he happens to have this thing called the Transvator. It's an elevator that has to do some kind of trans-universal teleportation, if you will. And I know that sounds very clear and close to what I talked about a possible, time travel type of thing. It's really not like that, and I'll get to that in a moment. But having it called the Transvator That would not fly now. That would not fly in 2023. That would be changed real quick. So, yeah, that surprised me a little bit. Anyway, the Transvader is basically kind of like an elevator, but his house is like a single-floor house with a basement. So why would he even have an elevator in the house that doesn't go anywhere? Well, he explains trans-universal elevators. Basically, this invention will take you to a different dimension, basically, and every single dimension you can go to out of the 4 or 5 options that you have in the book to go to can take you to places that look exactly like our reality, our world. But they always have just one change, and that's kind of bizarre. Well, he decides he's going to bring you back a present, you specifically, not his own niece, Jamie Jenkins, but he decides he's going to bring you, as the reader, in first person, a present back from another dimension or whatever. He gets in the Transvader, he takes a little trip to somewhere, and he comes back. He has this kind of creepy grin, though, when he comes back, and you're kind of like, what's going on? He hands you a box. You open up the box. You know what's inside of that box? All right, you're about to get a good dose of what I'm talking about with this book being pretty dark. You open it up, and there's your head inside of that box, but it's shrunken. And then you find out he's a nut job. He apparently is a different Uncle Darius that came from another reality in the Transvader, and he is a headhunter. And he hunts people down to take their heads. He starts going after you and Jamie to try to cut your heads off and shrink them down. He's a total mad, crazy scientist type. And you basically have to get into the Transvader with Jamie to travel to one of the 4 or 5 options you have that are different realities, right? And all of these realities, to try to get away from this other Uncle Darius, to find the real Uncle Darius, you have to go through all of these different realities, basically, to try to find him and rescue him so that you can solve your problem here. So that's a little bit of a fish out of water story, but in a fun way. I'm telling you, the execution of all of these realities were very good, very fun. A little short sometimes, but for the most part, pretty creative, pretty clever a lot of the time. Maybe not like the puns and the endings and stuff, they aren't that clever in this book, but some of the ways that you can handle some of these realities, pretty cool. Let's talk about some of those realities really quick. We have some that have like, well, for example, the one that really stuck out to me because I hate bugs is that in one reality, everybody talks like a zombie. Very slow, very tedious, very brainless, if you will. And they all happen to have bugs all over their arms and legs and stuff underneath their clothing. And that's super bizarre. And they come after you, the bugs try to infect you. That's pretty well done. That's a pretty well executed storyline. I really like that. There's another one involving the headhunters. For example, you go to the reality that actually does have this crazy Uncle Darius that's trying to chop your head off and gave you the shrunken head of yourself. You go into one reality, and everybody there is trying to do what he's doing. They all just hunt people down and take their heads. That's pretty grim. You go to another one that's like everything is upside down, gravity is actually reversed in that particular world. All of that stuff is really cool. There's a lot of other ones I do want to talk about, but I don't want to spoil too much for you. I want you guys to go in and not really know too much. But I think the things I told you were the best of the best and some of the most creative of the creative that was in here. It was really fun. It was a fun read. I had a good time. Even though I'm still not feeling 100%, still a little congested, still a little snotty, I had a really good time reading this. I'm actually glad that it started off as good as it did. I had a couple of times that I actually laughed reading this book because of some of the jokes in here. Again, it's not very clever with the writing and with the puns that GYG books typically have, but for the most part, I had a pretty engaging time. I never really wanted to break away. I literally sat down for like 2 hours and just read this book nonstop. Aside from when my wife left for the day and I walked out to the car with her, I pretty much spent my entire morning just reading this for like 2 hours. I had a great time. I really couldn't peel myself away either. And the book kind of flew by, too, which was strange to me. But the tensions that build in here, especially when you have to confront the evil Uncle Darius, the headhunter Uncle Darius, that was fun. That was really fun. For such an awful cover on this book, it did not do this book any justice at all. It really didn't, and it's kind of a shame, frankly. Because the book deserves better. It's one of those great examples of a Goosebumps book, particularly a GYG Choose Your Own Adventure style book, which I forgot to mention. These are basically Choose Your Own Adventure books, in case you didn't know that. I don't need to explain it. I explain it in every single video. I think one will suffice not to. These are basically Choose Your Own Adventure books, and for one like this, with all the options it has, there's a ton of choices in this book, by the way. Some of them, some Goosebumps books, GYG books, don't always have a ton of options. They're kind of very streamlined in a lot of ways, where basic decisions are pretty much made for you. This one has a lot of different ones, and it gets kind of wacky sometimes, in a good way, in a really good way, as a matter of fact. I don't really have a whole lot more to say about this one. It's a really dark book. It has a lot of discussion about decapitation, and since you're a kid, there's a lot of discussion about cutting you and Jamie, two kids, heads off. That's crazy to me. In a scholastic book, that kind of surprises me they were able to get away with that. I feel like you couldn't get away with that now. To be fair, though, in Goosebumps Most Wanted, we have a special edition called Zombie Halloween that's pretty gory. And Goosebumps Wanted the Haunted Mask is pretty gory. So, it could get worse. Even though this one has a lot of depictions of people getting their heads chopped off and that kind of thing, or booby traps going off on you, a lot of stuff like that is not as gruesome as I'm making it out to be, but just the idea, the way your brain could really develop some of these ideas, even as a kid, is pretty surprising that all that's in here. Anyway, with all that being said, the book's cover is horrible, but the book itself is good. I enjoyed this. I can't believe that this is not something people recommended more, or people really enjoyed more. Like I said, I went into it being kind of worried, because I thought that it would be more of like a time travel thing. At some point you'd have to deal with dinosaurs, and I've read so many Goosebumps books like that, even the basic ones like Cuckoo Clock of Doom, which is also mentioned in here, by the way. Even the basic kind of time travel type of things, I get so sick of time travel stories and shrinking person stories. I hate those types of stories. They're obnoxious, they're overdone, especially in Goosebumps. And I worried about this one. I put it off for years and was determined it was going to be one of the last ones I ever read, because of how bad the cover was, because of how bad the general idea was to me and what I thought it was going to be. But this is a great example of, I don't read the backs of these books before I go into them. I just kind of pick the books up, you know? And that kind of paid off this time, because I went into something I expected it to be really rough and really just not for me at all. Maybe for somebody who's newer to Goosebumps or who likes the more silly concepts and whatever. This was really solid, and this was pretty violent. So if you like that kind of thing, this is for you. Goosebumps, or Give Yourself Goosebumps. Number 34, Elevator to Nowhere. Do I love it? No. It's good. It's really solid, but I don't love it per se. Would I recommend it? Yeah, to the right person. If anybody else sounded interested while hearing this review from me, or from somebody else, if you happen to come across a review from somebody else about this book, which for me, I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about this book. I could be wrong, but I don't think anybody in the basic YouTube reviewer community of Goosebumps stuff, I don't think anybody's talked about this book as far as I know. I could be wrong. Maybe Completionist did, but I'll tell you now, this is pretty solid, and it kind of surprised me a little bit. But anyway, Elevator to Nowhere. Have you guys read this one? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Put your thoughts and comments down below in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. I hope you like it. If you haven't read it before and you check it out on my behalf, on my recommendation, I hope you like it. I hope it's something that will surprise you as much as it surprised me with how clever it can be in the story executions. I think a lot of that was very well done. Anyway, when it comes to Elevator to Nowhere, if I had to rate this book on a 5-star basis, I would probably give it about a 3 out of 5 stars. But it's like a high 3 out of 5. It's very close to being a 4. It just doesn't quite get there for me. But it's a high 3 out of 5. A really solid one. Really, really big recommendation from me. Personally, I think I like this more than Hocus Pocus Horror, which I reviewed yesterday. Hocus Pocus Horror has a lot of weak links to it. It was decent. It was good. It was fine. But I feel like this is surpassing that, for sure. Is it as good as something like the Wicked Wax Museum, which I just recently reviewed, like earlier this week? No, that's way better than this. But still, when it comes to Elevator to Nowhere, I do recommend it. I hope you check it out. Even though the cover sucks, this will probably be the bottom, if I had to bet. I'm not remembering everything off the top of my head, like the Twister of Terror, whatever, cover of the dog, the pug, and the tornado. GYG books had some bad covers, man, some of the later ones. And I will tell you, this might be the bottom of the list, as in the worst for me. It might be the worst of all of the Goosebumps covers, like I said, but that's a weird one. That's an ugly one. A really bad idea for a really solid read. I don't know what else you could put in here to be the new cover if I had to change it myself in my own brain. But that's like the least violent image in the entire book, so I don't know. Maybe you could have just had the gravity reversed thing. That could have been kind of cool as a cover. Anyway, What do you guys think about the book? Put your thoughts and comments down below again. Thank you for watching, guys. God bless you all. I hope to see you tomorrow in another review. Like I said, I'm going to take a break for a couple of videos to review something else. Maybe some Series 2000 books, maybe a TV book or two. I don't know. But I'll come back and I'll do the GYG stuff probably next week on Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday, somewhere in there, and try to get them wrapped up and reviewed then for you guys. And then we'll have the big videos. Hopefully my voice will be completely recovered by then, and I can do those massive ranking videos that I think a lot of you guys look forward to. Anyway, with all that being said, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for listening to me ramble for so long. God bless you guys. Goodbye.